Professor Worgley's here. I've downloaded this zip file and I'm going to load it into NetBeans. Let's go ahead and start coding and get this application to work. This is one of the best examples for your final project. Let's first explore a little bit and let's take a look at the code that's already here. So first, let's start in the main class. So remember, the main class is the same name as the project. You'll see here I have the 3 lines of code that we've been using. I load the fxml file into an object, and then I actually call the load method, which is what we normally do. But why do I want the object? Is so I can load the controller. And when I have the controller, I can pass the stage over to the controller before it's destroyed. It's a parameter in the start method. So once this method is finished executing, this parameter will be destroyed. If we go over to the controller, you'll see I have the start method or ready method here. It saves the stage. That way I can use it later. It's also creating a web engine. Okay, this web engine is important for this application to work. We're going to be using what's called a WebView. It's essentially a browser on your application. So if I open up the fxml file and look at the layout, it's a basic layout. And that's a good reason for an application. The New York Times, it's a complicated website. I just want something simple where you can search for a query and you'll see the corresponding articles. You click on an article and you can view it. Now, in order to view a website or a URL, we need to use a web view. So the bottom half of this is a web view, and you can think of it as a browser. The only difference is with a real browser, you have tabs at the top, you have a search bar, you have a back button, a refresh button, a home button, and all the corresponding other parts of the application. For a web view, it's basically everything below it. So it's everything that you can see on the website. So it's essentially like a browser. It just has a little bit less functionality. It's used to view the website instead of actually being a complete application itself. So you see I'm using a web view to load the URLs, and I'm setting that up here in the ready method. So you'll see the web view has an engine, and the engine can load URLs. Then you'll see I create an object for the New York Times manager. This is one of the most important classes. You can think of this class as the model. Okay, so this is my controller, and you can think of this as the model. It's going to go and connect to the API, grab the data, store the data, and organize the data so we can display it on the view. Okay, so you can consider this as the controller, and I'm instantiating the model. Remember, that's what we did in the MVC lecture. We instantiated the model, and the model keeps track of the data. Well, the API is the data. So the model will connect to the API, download the data, store it, sort it, and do whatever else it needs to do. You'll see I have an observable array list. This is an FX collection, the JavaFX collections. So if you're using collections, this will meet one of your criteria. It's an observable array list, so it's one that's actually going to be observed on the UI, where users can select the articles. So if I go back to the view here, you'll see I have a list view. In this list view, I'm going to have an observable array list of all the articles. And then I have an event listener. So whenever they select an article, I can actually grab that and load the corresponding news. So let's first start here in the New York Times manager. Okay, this is like our model. So you'll see here I have some information. I have the URL string. I have the base URL. If you notice, this is HTTP, API NewYorkTimes.com, SVC search version 2, article search.json. Where is this coming from? If I go back to the API, it's right here. Okay, you'll see it's actually been updated a little bit. They're using HTTPS. This is the base URL. So copy this and paste it here. Make sure it's updated. If it's using HTTP, it may not work. So make sure you update it to HTTPS. We'll see if anything else changed. So if I paste it, okay, looks like the only thing that has changed is the HTTPS itself. Okay, so make sure you put your S there. You'll need to put your API key here. I provided one, but I do not think this one works. So make sure you have your own API key. I usually create an API key for the lecture and then I delete it. So you may see me put my API key here, although it may not work later. So make sure you come and get your own API key. Okay, you'll see I created one from the past and you should see the API key here. So if you have an API key, you'll specify what the app name is and what you're trying to do with it. And then I can copy the API key here. Okay, and you'll paste your own API key here. Now I have a search string. This is the default search string. Remember I said your application needs to have default data? Well, when the TA loads your app and you're using an API, they may not know how to use your API. So even if you're using an API, you should load some default data for them. So the default data that this application is loading is for University of Missouri. You'll see I have a URL, and then I have an array list of news stories. You'll see the type is New York Times news story. We should open up this class here. Now this class is implemented quickly just so I can get a class up. They're all public, and you'll see I have a constructor here. If you're going to use this project as an example, you should use proper programming techniques. Make these all private, perform data encapsulation, and then have your public getters and setters. Now, you don't need to write all those from scratch. In fact, NetBeans has a shortcut. NetBeans will write all the getters and setters for you. You'll see this option here. So if I click on refactor, I can say encapsulate the fields. Remember, data encapsulation is making the fields private and creating public getters and setters, which are predefined methods. That's going to be on the exam. Make sure you go back over our OOP concepts. What's data encapsulation? What's inheritance? What's polymorphism? What's implicit and explicit casting? So if I click encapsulate the fields, it'll actually show you all the fields and I'll ask you, what do you want to create for the getters and setters? So I can select all. So I'm going to select all these fields and create all the getters and setters. Okay, you'll see insert point, sort by, Java docs. The fields visibility should be private, and the accessors visibility, which are the getters and setters, should be public. So I'm going to click on refactor. Look at that. It changed all the fields private. And look at this. It made all the getters and setters for me. Look at that. And even put nice Java docs for me. Make sure you use NetBeans. This is a nice tool. Instead of having to write all the getters and setters manually, you can have it do it for you, and it even performs data encapsulation correctly. So now this is a proper class. Now look what I'm collecting. I'm collecting the web URL, headline, snippet, lead paragraph, news desk, section name, and source. Does this sound familiar? If I go back to the API and do another query for University of Missouri, execute, you'll see that information here. Here's the abstract, web URL, snippet, lead paragraph, and source. And more corresponding information if you scroll down. So here I'm collecting the web URL, snippet, lead paragraph, source, and other corresponding information. So if I go back to the manager, I'm storing an array list of this type of news stories. You'll see I have a constructor. So whenever this model is instantiated, the constructor will create the array list. Remember, on collections, we use the diamond notation. There's no reason to put the type twice. Otherwise, you'll get a warning. So we use the diamond annotation. That will also be tested on the final exam. Make sure you go back and study that. You'll see the load method takes a search string and it's going to make a request to the API. Now this API is going to be similar to what's returned in the browser. So we're going to get a big string like this. Okay, it's going to be a big JSON array, and we need to parse this. So guess what I'm going to use, just like I did before? I'm going to use the simple JSON library that we found, the third-party library, to parse this JSON. Okay, now using a jar file is a good way to earn bonus points. Now you'll want to find your own jar file and use your own external library that takes effort on your part to read the docs and import the jar. But if you find one, you could get a possibility of 5 bonus points. We're going to load the URL. We're going to use our API key. We're going to parse the JSON similar to what we did for our serialization lecture. And we're going to do that in the next video. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.